2003, Jarrod discovered a mutilated cow on his parents' property. At first, he thought it was attacked by wolves, but he soon found out it was something far worse. But before we get into his encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness, where I share encounters with the unexplained. If you've had an encounter that you would like to share, please email it to me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button, as I'll be uploading multiple times every week. So don't forget to corral that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Today's encounter comes from Jarrod, and it happened in 2003. Jarrod was 18 at the time, and he was still living at home with his parents, his two younger brothers, one who was 15, one who was 11, out in Western Alberta. His parents owned 2,400 acres right at the edge of the rolling foothills of the Rocky Mountains. His parents also owned 50 head of cattle and a whole bunch of chickens and 4 horses. His parents were by no means expert farmers. They had their own normal day jobs, and their property was just a hobby farm to them. Jarrod's parents ended up having to go to BC to go visit his aunt and uncle. So they asked him if he wouldn't mind just staying at home, keeping an eye on his brothers, and just kind of watching over the place for them while he was gone. Jarrod had no problem doing that. He had done that for them countless times before. So his parents were leaving on a Friday, and they were supposed to be coming back the following Saturday. So his parents left on the Friday. The Saturday night, him and his brothers, they stayed up late. He bought them pizza, and they just watched movies all night long. The following night, his brother woke up in the middle of the night. Now, this was his 11-year-old brother. His brother woke up screaming. It startled Jarrod, so he jumped out of bed, ran down the hall into his brother's room, and his brother was huddled in a ball on his bed, just staring at the window. Jarrod asked his brother, "What's going on?" And his brother told him that he had seen a werewolf looking through his window. Jarrod automatically thought, great, the horror movies you watch the other night have freaked my kid brother out, and now he's having night terrors. So he told his brother, "You know what, there's nothing outside your window, there's no werewolves, you're just scared from the horror movies we watched, go back to bed, you're fine." His brother was not having it. His brother refused to sleep in the room that night, so Jarrod actually ended up bringing his brother into his room with him, put his brother in his bed, and Jarrod just slept on the floor that night. The next morning, Jarrod got up, talked to his brother, and his brother was adamant that he saw a werewolf looking through his window. Jarrod asked his brother to describe what he saw, and he said he saw this big head of a wolf looking directly through his window down at his bed. Now, his brother's room, his window, was about 8 feet off the ground. So anything that would have been looking through that window would have had to have been at least 9 feet tall. So Jarrod thought, okay, this is definitely just my kid brother freaking out, having bad dreams because of the movies we watched. So again, he told his brother, "You didn't see anything, you're just freaked out from the movies. Don't worry about anything, you're safe, there's no such thing as monsters." His brother remained completely adamant, though, that there was a werewolf looking through his window at him the night before. Jarrod, at this point, just to put his brother at ease, told him, "You know what, you go have breakfast, I'm going to get dressed, I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to walk around the house, just so I could take a look at everything, see if there's any evidence of anything looking through your window, just so you could feel better and know that this was just a bad dream." So that's exactly what Jarrod did. He got dressed, walked across the house, went into the kitchen, and in their kitchen they had a big set of double sliding doors that led out onto their back deck. So Jarrod opened up those doors, he walked out onto the deck, walked down the stairs, and he walked all the way around to the front of the house. That's where his brother's bedroom window was, and right below the window was just all gravel. And he did notice that the gravel was slightly disturbed, but that was not overly uncommon because they lived in Western Alberta and they have pretty much any type of wildlife you can imagine in that area. So he figured it was probably just a coyote, maybe a raccoon, no big deal. So he went back inside, told his brother, "You know what, I walked around the house, I don't see any evidence of something looking through your window, it was just a bad dream." And that made his brother feel a little bit better. As soon as he said that to his younger brother, though, his 15-year-old brother said, "Hey Jarrod, what's up with the cows?" Jarrod said, "What do you mean?" And his brother said, "Well, look out the window, they're acting super weird." So Jarrod looked out the kitchen window and he noticed that all of the cows were kind of clustered in one corner of the field, right close over towards the house. And that was very uncommon. because in the morning they would typically be on the far side of the field over by the water hole. So Jarrod was like, okay, well, this is pretty strange. So he was kind of just looking out the window, looking at his cows, and he noticed about halfway between where those cows were and the water hole, he noticed this dark blob right in the middle of the field. So he's kind of looking through the window, trying to figure out what this blob was. And he also realizes that's a cow. There's a cow lying in the middle of the field. So now Jarrod figured he has to go investigate this. So he grabbed his quad keys, he went outside, got on his quad, and he made his way towards the cow. As he was coming up on it, he was coming up on the back end of it with its back facing him. And as he got closer, he noticed that there were these big gash marks all down the back of this cow, and there was blood everywhere in the area. So when he pulled up to the cow, he got off the quad and he walked around to the front of it. And he discovered that its stomach had actually been ripped open and all of its internal organs were gone. That alarmed him a bit because he had seen a calf get killed by a bear, and he had seen one of his dad's cows get taken out by a pack of wolves. And typically when that happened, there were little pieces of the cow everywhere, but not this time. It was just the only part of the cow that was actually missing was all of its internal organs. That was it. So he kind of stood there for a minute, just kind of looking around, trying to figure out what did this to the cow. After a couple minutes, he decided he was going to go back to his house and he was going to call his buddy and get one of his buddies to come help him get this cow back towards the house, get it into the shed, just so that it would not attract more predators, because he did not want to have to deal with another dead cow, especially considering the fact this was late September and his parents' cows had all calved already. So he had about 50 head of full-grown cows and about 15 calves at the time. So he was really concerned for those calves. So he went back to his house, he called his buddy John, and his buddy John told him, I can't come right now, but I could come after work. So through the rest of the day, Jarrod just kind of sat on the back deck, just looking at the cows, just making sure nothing was going to come after him. About 6 o'clock at night, his buddy calls him and says, hey, I'll be there in about an hour and a half. So Jarrod figures, okay, he's trying doing the math in his head, and he figures, okay, well, once he gets here, we're going to have about an hour of light before it's dark to deal with this cow. So when his buddy got there at 7:30, they hopped on his quad, and they went across a field up to this cow. When they got to the cow, his buddy was shocked at what he saw as well. And his buddy said he had never seen anything like that before either. So they started to tie the back legs of this cow up so that they'd be able to pull it back to the shed. As Jarrod was tying the legs off, his buddy started tapping him on the shoulder. So Jarrod kind of looked up at his buddy, and his buddy was just pointing across the field to the far end. So Jarrod looked up and he looked across the field, and sure enough, there were these 3 massive grayish black wolves just staring at them from across the field. So Jarrod said to his buddy, yeah, I see them. We're going to deal with them once we get this cow back to the shed. So they quickly finished tying it up, hooked the ropes up to the quad, and they tried to pull this cow back to the shed. However, they could not pull this cow across the field with this one quad. It just did not have enough power, and they were really struggling just to try to move it a couple of feet. So Jarrod told his buddy, okay, we're going to untie, we're going to go back to the house, I'm going to get my dad's tractor. So they unhooked the ropes, got on the quad, and they made their way back up to the house. When they got to the house, Jarrod turned and he looked across the field, and he noticed that those 3 wolves were actually closing in on that dead cow. So at this point, Jarrod decided that's it. He ran inside, he grabbed his dad's rifle, came back out, and he said to his buddy, we're running these things off the property now. So they both jumped onto the quad, and they went booking it across the field towards these wolves. When they got about halfway towards these wolves actually turned around and they ran right back for that far bush line. So that's exactly where Jarrod and his buddy went. They drove right past the dead cow and right up to that far bush line. When they got about 50 yards from it, Jarrod stopped the quad and he turned it off. And they just kind of spent the next 15 minutes just kind of looking into the bush, just kind of trying to figure out where these wolves actually went. So after a little while, Jarrod kind of took a look at his watch, and he figured there was about 20 minutes of daylight left. So he said to John, hey, do you just want to sit here till dark, and we'll see if these wolves come back out? If they do, he said, I'm going to take a shot at them because I don't want them killing any more of my dad's cows. His buddy agreed, said, yeah, you know what? I have no problem doing that. Let's just sit here and we'll see if they come back out. So that's exactly what they did. They sat there right until dark, and they did not see these wolves again. So they kind of talked amongst themselves and said, okay, you know what? Let's head back now. We'll deal with this cow. So Jarrod went to start the quad. He starts the quad, and he starts to turn the quad. And as he's turning, in the headlights, all of a sudden in front of him, he sees these amber glowing eyes. And these eyes were about 4 feet off the ground. So Jarrod instantly figured this is one of those wolves. So he quickly stopped the quad, and he just started staring into the bush. Well, John, as soon as Jarrod stopped the quad, kind of noticed something was up. So he started looking around as well, and he saw the same eyes that Jarrod was looking at. So the two guys stared at these eyes for a second, and all of a sudden these eyes that were at 4 feet rose to 9 feet up off the ground. When that happened, both guys were just staring at the eyes, trying to figure out if they actually just saw what they saw, and kind of trying to figure out how these eyes went from 4 feet to 9 feet. So they're staring at these eyes, and this thing starts coming towards them from inside the bushes, and it's illuminated fully in the headlights of the quad. This thing broke the tree line, and Jarrod said what was standing in front of him he could only describe as a living werewolf. He said this thing was 9 feet tall, completely covered in hair, built almost like a bodybuilder, just huge muscles on this thing. And he said that the back legs, the lower legs, actually bent backwards just like a dog. So he's seeing this thing in front of him, John's seeing this thing in front of him, and instantly Jarrod just floors the quad, turns, and starts flooring it right back towards his house. So they're booking it across this field, and they're coming up towards that dead cow. And now that dead cow at this point is about 200 yards from them. As they're coming up towards this cow, they all of a sudden notice right beside this cow, there's 4 of these amber eyes right by this cow, and they're actually pulling this cow across the field. They're pulling it to the other bush line. So Jarrod kind of swerves his quad and just beelines it right back for his parents' house. They get to the house, jump off the quad. They ran up onto the back porch. Jarrod instantly unslung his rifle and got it up, and he was looking across this field. And he said that there was no light shining into this field, but he saw 3 sets of these amber eyes right along the bush line. So they just kind of stood there for a minute and just stared at those eyes across the field. After a few seconds of staring at those eyes, Jarrod said there was this earth-shattering howl. He said this howl was so loud that the only thing he could compare it to would be like standing beside a train when it blows its horn. He said it was just earth-shatteringly, ear-piercingly loud. As soon as they heard that howl, they turned and they just went right into the house. As they were coming through the front door, Jarrod's 15-year-old brother was actually coming towards the door because he had heard that howl too. So he started asking them a bunch of questions. He started saying, what was that? Like, why are you guys so scared? Like, what's going on? What's happening? And Jarrod actually ended up telling his 15-year-old brother everything that happened. But he told him not to tell their 11-year-old brother. He said he did not want to traumatize their little brother any more than he had already been traumatized from the night before. So his 15-year-old brother agreed, and John at this point spoke up and said, you know what? I'm not going home tonight. I'm not going out there walking to my truck to drive home. I'm staying here. I'm not going outside. So that night, everybody just kind of slept in the living room of Jarrod's house. The next morning, once it was bright, John went out to his truck and he went home. For the next 3 days until their parents came home, the boys just spent all their time in the living room. They did not go outside. If one of them went to a back room, they would go in groups. They did not want to be alone. When their parents got home, Jarrod told his dad exactly what happened, and his dad did not believe him, and his dad did not believe their younger brother either. He told them it was just a bear that got the cow, it was just a bear that dragged it off into the woods, and that was it, and he did not want to hear anything else about it. For years, Jarrod hasn't talked about this to anybody aside from John and his 15-year-old brother. His younger brother, to this day, does not know what happened that night. And Jared's advice is just always be aware that there are things out there that most people don't believe in. He said before he had this encounter, he didn't believe in anything like Sasquatch or Dogman or anything like that. So his only advice is just always have an open mind. Well, that's it for today's encounter. Thanks for joining us. And as always, guys, if you have any comments on this, please leave it in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please corral that subscribe button. And I'll see you next time.